quote a great writer, a new Canadian Football League season has arrived, bringing a familiar wave of optimism across the country. For fans, this is the time of year when past heartbreaks are replaced with the hopes of a bright future, fueled by training camp buzz and preseason highlights of all teams' Grey Cup aspirations feel within reach. From seasoned vets eyeing another championship to fresh-faced rookies eager to make their mark, excitement is palpable. Every roster move is dissected, every snap analyzed as we all try to figure out who's poised for the breakout. A CFL rundown again all season long, analyzing the league's top stories and breaking down the action while offering up our best takes. We'll be with you every week, covering the 3-down loop from every angle. We're talking about here the writer from the Winnipeg Press. He's our guest today, Jeff Hamilton. He also has a YouTube show called Winnipeg Sports Talk, and he is, of course, the president of the Football Reporters of Canada. Jeff, this is your life. I mean, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, boys. Really looking forward to chopping things up. I will make one correction to you, Frank. I don't own Winnipeg Sports Talk. That's my friend Hustler, but I am co-host of CFL 110. I'd love to take credit for what he's built there, but I won't.
Okay, so I stand corrected, and today we'd like to talk about really what I think are the main stories, and it will be taking a big bite out of them because they kind of do it. The rules, the playoff surprises and disappointments, and the Grey Cup in Winnipeg. So first of all, I guess the rules very quickly. We've had a few guests on, some people from the Canadian Football League, some people from TSN. And I think it's fair to say panning it hasn't been the favorite move for anyone. How do you feel about it?
About what?
The rules and the changes.
The rules in general, like I think for me, you have to look at them in two phases, much like the league is rolling them out, right? So I think you can look at them in 2026, right? And I think that's things are going to look a little bit different in that you're going to have, no loser point for the Rouge. You're going to have a 35-second play clock. You're going to have, what is the other rule in that? So 35-second play clock.
Shrinking the stadium.
No, that's 2027. So what are the rule? I'm trying to think of what the other rule is for 2026 that they're rolling. The loser point from the Rouge, the 35-second play clock, and what is it?
They're moving the goalposts. I looked at them as a group.
No, it's not until 2026, 2027 as well. I think none of the physical changes happen until.
Hey, I think we should restart, guys. We should restart. Like, if we're gonna talk about the rules, we should know the rules.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, I shouldn't have to ask you what the rules are. If you're asking me, we should know.
No, I just wanted a general. We didn't.
No,
okay, so it's modified rules and opposite field, team benches, and 35-second play clock. Those are the.
Okay, perfect. So are we still rolling with this then? Is this we're gonna roll?
Yeah, that's fine.
Can you edit this or no? No. Okay. Anyway, so it's like, I think those are palpable, right? Like those are like, okay, I think a lot of people go with the time clock, for instance. It's like, I think people look at the 20-second play clock, and I think that's kind of a little misleading, right? Yeah, it's a 20-second play clock when it's fired in, when it's whatever, but in plays where, you have running plays or you have completed passes, like if you actually do the time between it usually ranges between 35 to 45 seconds before the next play if you wanted to maximize, the full 20-second play clock along with the play being set in, right? So I do think that's easy to digest. I do think I think there are people, whereas there are hardcore traditionalists, even though the goalposts aren't going to be moved back, that will become in 2027. I do think there's a lot of people who do look at that Rouge point counting as say a victor, as we saw in that Toronto game a couple years back, where it was people, even the traditionalists are going to enjoy it. They're going to even celebrate it. But the average casual viewer is going to probably be confused, and then the person who doesn't really watch it, the American, if you will, is going to be completely perplexed, right? Like, what just happened here? What do you mean they won the game when he missed this field goal, right? So I think that's digestible. And so when you get into more in the 2027 year, I think it's harder to, for fans to really get behind, and personally for me to get behind. I'm not thinking that these are like horrendous changes. I kind of understand, if not agree with all of the changes. Like, for instance, this, in 2027, do I love getting rid of the 55-yard line? No. But if you're going to if you're going to move the goalpost back to the end zone and you're trying to maintain or increase scoring, you got to make the field shorter. It'd be it's too tougher of a task. And the same can be said about the end zone. Like, the end zones is like, if you kept the 20-yard end zones, you had Sean White coming out and talking about how his job was going to be essentially obsolete because he doesn't have that great of a range. And he's talking about how if you get to if you were to get to the 25-yard line, you're looking at a 52, or whatever. If you get to the 35-yard line, you're looking at 7 yards back. So that's 42 plus 20. So that's like it's like impossible. And so I understand the changes in that move. And then this is the part where I think people get a little, where you draw the line in the sand and you find yourself on one side or the other. And that's is whether you think this is moving towards Americanization of the game and whether you agree with that direction. And so that's where if you look at people who are hardcore traditionalists, they're going to look at they're going to look at it and they're going to think this is moving to 4 downs. This is moving to an American game. We're going to lose our identity, all those other things. And then, I think on the other side, you're looking at it, I find myself to be on this side. I'm not going to speak for this entire side, but like covering this league and seeing this league and not grow and have its challenges. I do think you need to crack into the American market. I don't think you need to become the American game, but you do need to be more palpable to a U.S. audience. And I think, I have friends who look at those things and, the large field, the uprights in the front of the end zone, all these different rules, and they don't want to play it. They don't want, and by play, I mean bet it. They don't want to watch it. They don't want to invest in it. And that's tenfold in the States, if not 100-fold. So I do think that these moves will become more palpable to American audience. The gamble, of course, is have you alienated your home base here in Canada to a degree that's going to have an issue when it comes to your bottom line? Because we know money talks here, and that's really, I think, becomes the issue and what the goal is for Stuart Johnson and his vision here.
Yeah, you're referring to bait and switch. So people are watching this football game on TV. It doesn't look different. You take the old version of the Canadian Football League, the new version of the Canadian Football League they're trying to create, and a person watching the screen, the TV, doesn't see anything obviously different until the game starts to play, until passes start to be made, and they count how many players on the field. But by then, they might still be involved and be interested in the game. So, yeah, and I think more or less also the field is accommodating more opportunities for the game to be played somewhere, whether it's the United States or other Canadian cities. That's the other, reason that it's a good idea, in my opinion. And I agree 100% with you that it's not that we want to throw our game at the Americans. We want them to dip their toe in and check it out and be subscribers to the game, however that plays out. David?
I mean, we've said it before on the show that the CFL will never, I in my opinion, will never be fully American, because how many leagues have tried to go up against what is already down south with the NFL and the NCAA and not work, right? The Canadian Football League works because of the things that made the Canadian Football League different, also because it's played in Canada. But I just see the field part too. I think it's just. And Jeff, I've had the same people that have just said, like, why are the field goals in the front, like why are the goalposts in the front of the end zone? Why does the CFL do this and that? Is those little quirks that have it, and some CFL fans might not understand this, but it turns the casual fans away. They just find it they can't make sense of some of those things that are just normal for people who have watched the CFL game week in and week out for years. You have to understand, and I think the league has understood, that they're trying to gravitate to the people that choose to not watch the CFL for these little things. The big one here too, like, it's such a sensible move, and I just never understood. I understood part of the reason why it's never happened, but like the team benches being on having them on opposite sides, like, this is not even just like about having, avoiding those. I mean, it was great for entertainment when Ryan Dinwiddie almost got into a fight with half the Elks bench after that game. But the idea of, you're hearing players saying it's nice to not that we won't have to run, more than we have to make a substitution, which also lends to longer delays to get the clock going because, refs are waiting for teams to make their substitutions. I talked to Wynn McManus. You have, they want to see a defensive play call from the coaching staff, but they're all the way on one end of the field and the coaches are on the other, and it's harder for them to see because the coaches can't cross to the other side of midfield because of where they're stationed. So, like, there's some changes that obviously are sensible. Obviously, some that I think fans are going to have a really hard time letting go. But I think I'm also one of those that you have to let it see, to actually see it and let it play out. You got to give it that opportunity before you can truly criticize it.
Well, I also think betting comes into play, honestly. Like, I think when you look in the U.S. markets, like, that's how you grow the game, unfortunately. At least that's one of the ways you grow the game to an American market, is to give them the opportunity to wager on it. And that will have them invested in the players and the teams and the play in general. And so I think that's a massive piece of the puzzle in that, when to the points being made here, when you look at that game and you see things like he got a point for kicking it in the end zone, and why are the goalposts at the front, and people look and go, I don't understand this game, so how can I bet on it? How can I put my money on a game where I'm thinking I just won and I lost? Like that. Like, there's people who go, okay, perfect, it goes down to this. They've never paid attention. They're finally cluing in. It's like a field goal opportunity, and they need to cover by 3. Because here's the other part, right? A lot of odds are covering by 3, and having these 1-point additions throws off those those avid and everyday bettors, right? Those are the ones you're looking at. You're trying to maximize a league, because you have a good reputation. You've been around for a long time. It's not this sketchy, deal that's just popped up and you're not 100%, how the officiating is going to go or what teams or what. Like, this is an established league. They should have been doing this long time ago. And, I do think that is obviously a big part of it. That's growing the audience, and that's growing it in the States and elsewhere, but particularly obviously in the US, where gambling on the NFL is through the roof.
Reliability is very important. You have to rely on what you're betting on. There has to be some trust that's in some leagues, teams disappear, players disappear, even whole leagues disappear, and that bites on basically being able to gamble. And so therefore, that's important that people become invested in the game. Now, I'm not one of those people who is against expansion into the U.S. I make this point. I've made this point for years, and this is not an attack on the Canadian cities individually, but it is an attack on Canadian mentality. We have this inferiority complex that if something isn't approved by Americans, for some reason, we think what we have isn't as valuable. Comedians, actors, groups go to the U.S. after not really getting a good opportunity here in Canada, become famous there, and all of a sudden Canadians are all good with it. I have one theory when it comes to the Canadian Football League, and as I said, I hope no city takes umbrage to this. We're seeing in real time what's going on with what attracts fans. You've got the Toronto Blue Jays playing against the New York Yankees, the Los Angeles Dodgers. If the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were playing against Los Angeles X or New York X, the excitement of playing, I'm not counting Saskatchewan because there's a lot of hatred there that motivates people to watch those games. But the point is that it's about relevance. And the Canadian Football League, because it relies on Canadians feeling they are relevant, they're on a handicap. And that I've come to realize and think that it would be great to have a couple of American teams and gin up some of that excitement that way, Jeff.
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. I think it's how you define value, right? Because, don't want to get too philosophical here, but if you have the American audience, you're inherently more valuable. Like, it's just like, that's what it is. Like, it's not about, oh, the Americans love it, then like, we love it. I do think there's an inferiority complex with our country, our individual cities, for sure, because we stick up for ourselves as Canadians, right? We're, we're vastly smaller, not in size necessarily and geography, but we are in population. And so it's just, a lot of people look at money, people who run media companies, sports organizations, all those things, they're not looking to capitalize on a Canadian audience, because when they see the costs that it takes to produce shows and things, you need the big ticket money. You need Americans to like your product if you want to be a massive success. That's just the fact. That's the facts everywhere. Maybe the one lone exception would be if you could get China on board. And I have a hard time thinking that China is going to suddenly be loving the Canadian Football League and representing it as often as they do, right? I mean, why do you look at O'Shea Ohtani, right? Japanese baseball player. Like, people were throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at him because they knew they were going to get it back, because whatever this guy endorsed would go through the roof. If O'Shea Ohtani started wearing a Toronto Argonauts hat every day and was his lid, how many people in Japan would be wearing that? Like, that's what you were buying. So there's value. Like I guess the point here is, and I think this is really the biggest message of all these rules, are Stuart Johnson is convinced the 9 teams in this league, the representatives for each one of these teams, that the vision should be bigger. Because and in doing so, in convincing them, from Wade Miller all the way through to the private teams in MLSE, what he's done is he's got them on board to invest more. Because I mean, that was in my conversations following the announcement, people kept telling me, look at the press conference. Look where it was, at the X Hotel in Toronto. I stay at the X Hotel in Toronto. I'm not going to pretend it's some kind of like, Taj Mahal or anything like that, but it is a nice hotel. Things were set up. It looked really beautiful. Like, it looked professional. And that's essentially what they're selling now. They're like, and I think this is the part that people are having a hard time accepting, is that they're caring more because they finally envision a product worth caring more about. And for years, that's been the issue. It's been a fun league. It's been a good league. It's been an opportunity for a lot of these private owners to have social lives and excitement and people to know who they are, and they could use it for their other businesses. And, this whole idea that we know that 7 out of 9 teams outside of pretty much, Saskatchewan and Winnipeg lose money. Well, has anyone considered that the business model is to lose money in the Canadian Football League? And so I do think, this vision, if given an opportunity, it is a gamble for sure in alienating the traditionalist fans. But if you want to see a CFL that is healthy, maybe not in the same health that you recall or remember in the 80s and 90s, the good old days, right? Where you could swig beers and nobody cared about franchises and they were all kind of spiraling, but figuring it out last second. That was the context of the last U.S. expansion. The context of this potential U.S. expansion is, we want to be legit. We want to invest in the product. And I think that needed to be done. And you can make the argument that why didn't they do this before? Why haven't they seen the value in the Canadian game? And that's a good question. But a lot of these people are not poor, and they know and they understand what makes money and what sells. And I think they're in some way, while it might be difficult to do, you don't really have any other choice but to kind of trust the people in that room that they care enough to make this finally grow. And that to me is the waiting game here. It's not going to be done in a year or two. Who knows how long it's going to take, but something needed to give with this league. And to the point where, the players, the coaches, general managers, the people who dedicate their lives to this league weren't even part of the conversation, because they had met with so much resistance in the past to any of these kind of ideas that it was just one large secret. So you can feel alienated, and I understand, but the CFL is a business. Stuart Johnston isn't the Prime Minister of Canada. He's not there because you voted him in. He got hired to do a job. And as a citizen, you can like it or you can not like it, and you can choose whatever you want to do with it. And that's the gamble in play right now.
The one thing here, Jeff, too, and I'm seeing so many fans saying, all these owners need to do to make the CFL better is to market more. And I'm like, but I think what the what the CFL is trying to tell the fans, what they're marketing isn't attracting what people think it's attracting. It's not attracting those. If it was as simple as marketing the game more, they would just do that rather than just.
I think it is as simple as marketing the game more. It's just to market the game costs a lot of money.
Yeah,
Sorry, guys,
it does. It does cost a lot of money.
That's what I'm saying. Not the kind of money that any teams want to spend. You could bring in, I mean, this is just very broad stroke comment. Yeah. You could bring in a high-end PR agency to look at the CFL, create commercials, create a buzz, man, marketing companies online. But they don't want to do that. That costs insane amount of money.
Yeah, right? and you're talking about a league that's losing money. So then you've got to take the gamble that a team that's losing money is going to spend a lot of money in the hopes that it's going to bring in money too, right?
That's David, that two words that business wants to understand and needs to understand before they take a single step. It's risk and reward. And the fact is the league has not taken any action that gets them the kind of reward they need in return. Let's keep this in mind as well. It's about keeping the CFL afloat, because it can't, the way it's working right now, it's antithetical to having ownership. There's lots of owners that want to be in it, but the reason they want to be in it is because they believe if they go in there, they'll be a part of some change. And right now, that change is what it looks like. It's a sea change. It is what it is. Like, and the Canadian Football League. And one thing I've learned, Jeff, we've had rules change. We've had a commissioner that was a business commissioner, Mr. McDonald's, and then we have a former player as a commissioner, and he played with the rules, and they changed some really good rules. And people were a little upset about the rule changes. They thought, oh no, the game's going to get destroyed. It didn't get destroyed. It actually was better. I think it is better. And so now there's the approach where now we're talking about the viewing, the way people view the game. This is only the beginning, because the CFL has to change how they can be seen as well, Jeff.
Yeah, of course. And that's what I mean. That's what was kind of my point that I made in my last little rant, was that, to what you mentioned, the risk and reward. I don't think the risk was worth the reward to those 9 people in the room back then. Suddenly, with this new vision, which we don't know, basic guys, we didn't even know the potential rule changes, was never leaked or whatever. We don't know what the grand vision is here. Like, you don't let somebody, you don't hide, go to the lengths that Stuart Johnson did to hide these details from anybody and everybody, to the point where people were signing non-disclosure agreements and then suddenly reveal what your grand vision is. Like, that's not what you do. Like, so we don't, like, again, we're left to pick up the pieces. I do think it's obvious. I do think that, that cleaning up that image, that's why you're slowly taking this time to do it. You're not going to be, I think people need to have that time to process it, right? They need to have the time to process these changes. The stadiums need the time to do the structural changes to their stadiums, and make, it's not just like shrinking it and seeing the lines going. You have to make it aesthetically look good. Who knows what teams will do? I think there's some questions certainly to be asked about the fans who sit in the front rows of the end zones, because those seats will suddenly look different, right? So with the product bit deeper in depth. So, but to the image part, that's what I think they're slowly doing, is they're getting players used to it, right? This league is not used to change. To your point, Frank, yes, there's been changes made throughout from different commissioners that have for the most part, I can't think of one that has made the game better, but that's been a result of like borderline revolts, right? Like an incident has happened, like in any company, right? I did in my other work, I do investigative work. I did investigative work on childcare homes last year. And when I spoke to them about policies and stuff, I got a great idea, because they work with kids, that their policy, like I look at their policy books, and their policies are as thick as the phone books we used to get. And it was, I'd be like, why is it so thick? Because if something would happen, and then they'd have to be like, we didn't ever know how to deal with this. We have to create a new policy. That was kind of the deal for the CFL. Whether it was Garrett Marino, right? Like, how do we get this guy out of the game? Well, let's tack on this suspension, which is the precedent, and let's tack on another suspension for his behavior, and then we'll call it the league's biggest suspension, right? Like, they've kind of done things on the fly. A couple years ago, right, back in 2019, 2019 it was, when Andrew Harris tested positive for anabolic steroids, right? Like, there's no rule in the CFL that prevented him from winning the awards. Fast forward to today, and there still isn't a rule because it didn't create the outrage that a Garrett Marino did. It created buzz, and people understood why he wouldn't win an award. And the NFL has those rules, but it never hit that threshold of annoying enough people or believing it was the right thing. My point being is, all those other changes that we've seen under those commissioners, for the most part, being the difference to what we're seeing roll out here, is that was peer pressure. No one was peer pressuring the league to change
I disagree.
the rules.
There's pressure here to make money. And
there's pressure here to make money, absolutely. But I'm talking about the fan base.
Yeah,
there's
no kidding.
There's no pressure from the fan base to be like, there's pressure from the fan base to add a 10th team. There's pressure from the fan base to market the players more. There's pressure from this fan base for organizations to turn a profit. Natural things, right? But there was no pressure to be like, you need to change. If anything, people loved the game. That was their selling point. That was their argument for why they should be doing all this, whether it be increased marketing, whatever their desire was all built on the fact that they believe and still believe that the Canadian game is superior to any other football game on the planet. So,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's kind of like it is a, it is a business, right? There is a direction to make money. But that whole thing needed convincing, because you do have markets like, Saskatchewan, obviously Manitoba, where it's like, if I'm Wade Miller at that table, I'm thinking, okay, like, this is intriguing. I like the excitement and the passion that seems to be coming from the markets that maybe didn't express that much, care in previous, whatever eras or years. But at the same time, he's probably thinking, how am I going to sell this to my fan base? I'm selling out the stadium every week. I'm full of a province full of traditionalists. And the fact that Wade is on board with this, I'm not saying that should put everybody at ease, but I do think that, this is a man who doesn't want to lose that Canadiana, doesn't believe, the future is American expansion per se, in that we turn into the American game. But at the same time, again, back to my earlier point, we don't know the whole vision. So there is too much gray, that I think bothers a lot of people.
I think there's also a point where you don't want to lose an idea in its infancy because you broadcast it too soon, before you have enough alliances to maintain the wall, the strength of commitment to those decisions. And so if all the teams are told, let's not say anything, but let's make sure we all agree and we all understand what the marching orders are, and we all understand what the points of contention may be and how to deal with them, it's a better plan. If you just blurt out something bit by bit, Jeff, we as reporters will tear that stuff apart piece by piece. But if it all comes out as almost like a fait accompli, now the people who ask questions, like you and I and David and everybody else, we're asking the same question as you said to your ownership at your team. We ask the same thing of ours, and they're coming out with the same answers. It makes it hard for people to at least not stop and take a chance to listen and to experience what those changes mean, because at their face, they don't change, in my opinion, they don't change the game. What changes the game for me is the value of the game to Canadians. Whether we're playing California or Ohio, the important thing is, what I look at is that you and your base, what keeps them interested in football, because that should be our priority. Keeping football alive in Canada. And it can't be alive like this. 1, 2, people complain about the rules. Canada doesn't have one set of rules that they play football. You know full well where you are, how kids grow up playing one way, and then they get to college, university, and then the game changes or is uniform there, and then they go to the Canadian Football League. It's not like nobody understands that the game is different in Canada. It's not uniform here.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree, but I mean, so how do you fix that?
Well, you make the game so that anybody can play it. You make the fields more and this is the other. We lost them. You make the fields more appropriate for anybody anywhere, right? That's the way I see it, David. Because the fields, if they're the same, if they fit better with a soccer field or fit better with a track, they fit better with blah 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 blah. We're at a point now where municipal and provincial and Canadian money to invest in stadiums needs to be done so that you can have as many different disciplines playing out of that place, right? We know that in Montreal they have a track, and the track's the reason why the football field's weird. That's a simple answer to what I'm talking about.
You must have put a time limit on Jeff or something, and just
no, I didn't boot him out.
Well, just keep an eye. We'll just keep an eye if he's coming back. But I think the big one here, Frank. I think the other thing that we haven't really talked about, which is communication between all levels of football, right? Obviously, yes, the CFL is a business; it's its own entity, but it has a big job in terms of being in charge of professional football in this country. But there should be a partnership between them and youth sports and the other levels of football. There should be more
and other sports, David. I'm sorry, but and other sports. Football's a short season.
Yeah, well, definitely. But I do think that there's something to be said about, people are not like, I think that the whole ecosystem of football in this country, it's you talk about how it's different in Manitoba, could be different in Ontario, Quebec. Like, it shouldn't be that way. If we're going to call it the Canadian game, as you say it should be the Canadian game everywhere, right? From one coast to the other, right? We can't call it the Canadian game. I get it. Things can change. Like hockey, I'll bring up hockey because that's the other, big sport here. Hockey does change, right? There's no contact when the whole, no hitting and things like that. There are differences, but dimensions are the same for the most part, right? Obviously, it changes as you get older, but a hockey rink is still a hockey rink and how it's done. The game is played the same, whether you're in one rink or another rink. Like there does, I think, need to be a little more uniformity with that.
Because of the rink, right? So they got to play within the confines of a rink. Because if you have a junior team playing, you have every level of hockey playing there. You have to keep in mind every league has to be comfortable in the arena, the space in the arena, the size of the arena.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I do think that there is something to be said. And I think Jeff brings up a lot of great points in that, you are trying to sell a game, but clearly the CFL also believes that things need to be like they needed a shakeup. Things just needed to be things. And I don't know if I don't know. I don't want to put words in Jeff's mouth whether he was advocating for this, but it did just kind of feel like, yes, the CFL could obviously throw a lot of money into like they tried the genius route that hasn't really worked out. But you've got to find a way to make this game appearance to be, I guess, more acceptable to a wider base, right? I think that's what it comes down to.
All right.
Is he back yet, or we're still missing him?
Yeah, we're still missing him. I'm watching for him. Okay. He might have had to. He's just for the sake of conversation and understanding. Jeff's coming to Toronto, or he is in Toronto right now because he's going to cover the there's a baseball game going to happen here tomorrow. There's some of that stuff, and he's a reporter for the Winnipeg Free Press, and so therefore he covers a lot of different sports. And we heard in this interview that he also does some investigative reporting. So if you want to have enough food on the table and a place to live, you learn to be diverse, right, David?
Yes. You got to.
If
You
you're
can't be a one-trick pony in this business. I'll say that.
exactly.
Maybe you want to shift gears to.
Yeah, that's what I want to do. And I was
we've
just
got the playoffs come up. If Jeff
yeah.
is able to come back, we can
Yeah,
get his
let's
thoughts
talk.
on the
Let's
playoffs.
talk about that. We were going to do it with him anyway. The playoff surprises and disappointments. We now have, we know now that Ottawa, Toronto, and Edmonton are not in the playoffs. In that group, are there any real quick the surprises and disappointments in that group? For me, it's real simple. Edmonton, we always held hope for. Ottawa, we held out hope for them as well. And we suspected the Argos might have a tough year because of all the changes. So that's the short answer on those issues for me.
Yeah, I mean, look, so in order for a team to get in, other teams have to lose out. I think the disappointment, obviously, Toronto because they won the Grey Cup. You don't expect a Grey Cup team to go 5-13 the year after. Oh wait, no, they went 4-14 the year after they won in 2017 when they won 4-14 2018. But like, look,
guys, my computer just turned off. It just turned
off.
No worries.
You know what, Jeff? That has happened to me so many times, and Frank's has had to carry me because it just like.
Well, you're kind of like I can't. Anyway. Back here, guys.
We're
getting
into the playoffs right now.
Yeah. I think we talked enough about the rules.
Yeah.
And now we wanted to talk about the playoff, surprises and disappointments. So I started by talking about Edmonton and Ottawa were two teams that we saw that were making a move up. And I saw the Argos as a team that was in danger of having a bad year. Historically, they've had bad years after winning the Grey Cup. That's where my feelings went. Go ahead, Jeff. And then David can repeat.
Yeah, like for playoff, I mean, I wasn't one of those teams that thought that Ottawa was going to be, like necessarily growing off their season. Like I didn't think that they were going to be atop of the East, because I didn't, if you looked at their season before that, when they, in 2024, when they finally got into the playoffs for the first time since 2018, they had such a hot start. Right. And then, but when you look at their record, they end up being 9-8-1, right? That wouldn't even be good enough to get in the West this year. Right. So like, and it would have been good enough to get in the West, I believe that year as well. Actually, that might've been different. That might've been one of the weaker West years, but regardless, but I didn't think they were necessarily not going to make the playoffs. Right. And same story with Toronto. Like Toronto, for me, what I felt like, I thought they were going to struggle this year, especially with the Chad Kelly stuff. And then certainly as that kind of continued on, like, look, I thought Nick Arbuckle had a great season, but I'm not one of those people who goes, Nick Arbuckle wasn't the problem, blah, blah. I think Ryan Dinwiddie could turn a lot of people into what Nick Arbuckle did. Like if you had Nick Arbuckle's skill set, I think Ryan Dinwiddie looks at Chad Kelly and goes, I could have done even more with Chad Kelly behind center. Right.
That's
like,
fair.
So to me, I think what happened in Toronto was, and they've been able to do this. You mentioned down years. Yeah, down year in Toronto might mean second place in the East, right? Like it doesn't necessarily mean dropping out. Under Dinwiddie, yeah, exactly. So, but and that is why Dinwiddie is in my opinion the best coach in the Canadian Football League, is because he's been able to allow the Argos organization to treat it like a business more than any other team in the league, right? Like John Murphy feels comfortable replacing anybody and everybody, right? Like the more, American running back, see you later. Like, AJ Ouellette, thanks. Got some good years from you. You can go be a face in Saskatchewan. We'll figure it out. But what happened this year was it just didn't work out. And
it's the exception that makes the rule.
Well, that's what I mean. And so whether you want to have the Chad Kelly, obviously compounded the issues, but I don't think they got that same return, right? And you saw Dinwiddie losing his mind more often than not throughout the season, calling out his players, because before this year, it all worked. Guys would come in, they'd learn the skill. Ryan would put together game plans week in, week out, and more often than not, they would win games, dominate games in some cases. So, I think, I'm not shocked. I'm shocked they didn't make the playoffs, but I'm not shocked they had a down year. Hamilton, I don't think a lot of people necessarily saw them doing what they did, particularly when they started as slow as they did this year. It was kind of like, oh, here we go again a little bit. And then, sure enough, they figured things out. I think it was might be incorrect here, but a 7-game winning streak or in around there in the middle of the season, got right back up to the top of the East. At the same time, Montreal was, for my money, was the team that was going to. I had Montreal and Saskatchewan in the Grey Cup final. I thought Saskatchewan was going to build off their year. I'll get to them in a second, but Montreal, with Davis Alexander moving on from Cody Fajardo, seeing what we saw from him in flashes, in 2024, I thought they were going to take that step, and sure enough, they did take that step, looked really good, then went through the issue of their quarterback missing a handful of games, and that put a lot more pressure on their defense, and they couldn't get the job done. Not getting the job done on offense leads to not getting the job done on defense, especially as you get later in games, and I think that's what you saw a lot with them. So, well, the Ticats got up to this lead. The Alouettes were kind of free-falling, giving them this really, really comfortable cushion that ultimately erased once Davis Alexander came back and needed to take it all the way to week 21 to get to figure out who was going to finish first in that division. So to me, Montreal is the best team in the East. It's going to be the biggest challenge, obviously, for Winnipeg first. And I think that's the way Winnipeg's looking at it. And I'm not saying when I use the word easy, I use that, please take that with an extreme grain of salt. No one's saying anything is easier here. But when you look at the way the two divisions are set up, I think a lot of teams would agree they'd rather, if you went through the East, not saying they would rather go through one or the other, but if you look at the advantage to the East and how it's set up, if you can get past Montreal, you're in a better position to beat Hamilton to go to the Grey Cup than if you were to come over to the West. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, are you drunk? Like, what's the deal? Like, you're telling me the 7 or was it 5-game winning streak BC Lions are going to be some easy deal? I'm not saying they are, but they're not as an experienced playoff team. And so I think, the playoffs are a different beast. It is another level. It takes another level of dedication, of focus, of discipline, all these things, right? And those things can unravel. We know how much momentum comes in a game. Well, that's magnified in playoff games. So that's really, I think, the missing link there too. The other thing too, and you can call it I don't think it's an equalizer, because I do think if you want to play the Lions, you want to have bad weather affect Nathan Rourke and have the run game be more important. The dome equalizes everything, right? So it's like, the weather is not going to be an issue. Anyways, outside of that, but my other point in that is if you get past BC, you're going to have a heck of a time being an incredibly good Riders team in Regina. And I think that would be a really, really tough challenge compared to Hamilton and Hamilton. We've seen weaknesses from Hamilton. Hamilton hasn't been that dominant team that maybe they were earlier in the year. And so I don't think anyone's really scared of Hamilton. So, I'll wrap it up by saying, I don't think there's a ton of surprises. I think everybody, I think if you guessed, maybe had the Ticats taking a dip, but a lot of people would have seen the Ticats at the end of last season and saw a team under Bo Levi Mitchell, who was an East, MOP nominee, that they were going to build on that and that they had finally figured it out. So I don't think it's all that surprising, especially with Edmonton. I think better days are ahead for Edmonton, but with going with Trey Ford at the start, with the hiccups, they obviously moved to Cody Fajardo far too late. Whether that would have, worked or not, we'll never know. But, I think we're looking at some teams. Maybe the orders are a little bit different, but it seems to be the usual suspects.
I agree how tough the West is. But even in the West, there's some inconsistency. And in the Canadian Football League, the beauty of the Canadian Football League is predictability isn't 100%. And to your point with Hamilton and Montreal, you don't know which team you're going to get. If Alexander gets hurt, Montreal's not anything like they are with him in the game. And Hamilton, is, to your point, I agree 100%, have been inconsistent. David?
Yeah, I mean, look, any team that doesn't have their starting quarterback, we've seen it time and time again how different it is. But I totally agree, Jeff. I think I said if you were a West team, you probably, and I get it, the crossover, getting to the Grey Cup, history tells you it's not easy. But this was probably the year that it looked a little more. I thought BC was going to maybe be that team that would have gone to the crossover and have a really good shot at getting to the Grey Cup. Now, I don't think that Winnipeg, this honestly, Winnipeg can't do it. I think they have a tough challenge against Montreal. Saying Montreal is that good of a team. But if there was a year that the crossover, you could really see, an avenue for a team to benefit from it, I do think it is this year, just because, as you said, if you can get past Montreal's the toughest test. Hamilton, their record is good, that Bo Levi Mitchell had a good season, but even Bo Levi Mitchell's had his off games, and that defense still doesn't. Out of all the playoff teams, I think that Hamilton defense doesn't strike fear, right? When you're trying to figure out how you're going to beat that Hamilton defense, I don't think that's really too much of an issue. I just think there's holes and flaws in Hamilton. I've been seeing it all year. Montreal, the only hole and flaw was their quarterback, who was undefeated as a starter, didn't play in every game. So I think like in the West, like Calgary, yes, they've had their ups and downs, but they've proven that if everything goes right for them, they're a scary out. And I mean, who wants to play Saskatchewan in Saskatchewan like that? Like that's a team that's top to bottom, has everything you need to be a champ, to be a contender. Just has to all kind of work out for them.
Hey, let me put it to you this way, and it might be a challenge for you, but I'm going to ask you to think back to 2019, and I'll provide a little bit of context for it. Obviously, that was the year the Winnipeg Blue Bombers went to the Grey Cup, snapped their big, lengthy drought. That year was in Calgary against Hamilton. But to get there, they had to beat Calgary, okay, who, to be fair, was kind of, like their glory years were, I'm not saying that they were certainly on the back nine of their glory years, but they weren't falling off. Mm-hmm. They were just they weren't as dominant, obviously, as previous years. They had made it to I think they won the Grey Cup in 2018.
They did, yeah.
And they'd made it to the Grey Cup the year before. So they'd made it 3 years in a row, finally snapped those losing streaks or whatever in that game. And so phone picked up that. So my point is that Calgary wasn't a slouch. So Winnipeg had to go into Calgary, okay, and beat the Stampeders. Then they did that. Then they had to go into Saskatchewan and play the top-ranked Riders. That was Craig Dickinson's only solid year. I believe they were 12-6. That was the year Cody Fajardo was the nominee for the West for MOP, and that was the infamous Cody Fajardo throw off the upright ending at the end. Very close game. Saskatchewan, that's where, you don't want to be in that position, but that's an unbelievable position to be in to win a game. That is a chance to win the game. They beat them. Okay, so what, and again, it's a bit of not an odd question because it might be more difficult because you weren't in Winnipeg and probably don't know it as well. But do you think that route is harder, or again, I use easier very lightly, not as difficult than going into Montreal, who, let's face it, guys, their record is not what they are. This is the team I think a lot of people have winning the Grey Cup in the first game, and then you got to go to Hamilton and play Bo Levi Mitchell, who's an MOP candidate of the East, will be likely right out of the East, and beat them in Hamilton. What do you think would be tougher? That's why I asked this question to people who doubt. It's and the Bombers had to trade for Zach Collaros at the deadline, knew very little about him. Are we thinking that team was a bigger underdog than this team?
Well, for me, greatness needs to start somewhere. Greatness is something that we all look at in the mirror, in the rearview mirror. So to your point, no, there is no surprise. In the Canadian Football League, there never is a surprise. The fact that nothing happens is a surprise in the Canadian Football League. So I go into you want me to pick which teams are going to be in there? At the beginning of the year, I thought Montreal and I thought Saskatchewan. That's who I thought was going to make it based on the previous year. But you know what? I've got my thumb off that scale now, David. It's off that scale because I believe there's surprises in the works.
Explain yourself. What do you mean?
I want to hear.
Well,
I want to hear because hey,
wait, what do you mean? You think there's surprises in the works, and then you just, you can't. So what are you? Let's see you call your shot. What do you think?
To your point,
because the surprises are, I think there's clear underdogs and there's clear favorites. So who's your as far as odd makers?
That doesn't. You just went and told us about Winnipeg and the challenge that they had and how they won. We can see that. We can see that again. We can see Winnipeg. I'll tell you what. I'll disagree.
What's this we business? What's this we business stuff? I'm asking you to call your shot, Frank. What is it?
I'm saying, look, we have teams that I think at least 4 teams that I can see winning the Grey Cup. And I include Winnipeg in that, not because the path is easy, but because the path is hard. The one thing that the Canadian Football League has, and that is the reason teams get upset is because the other team works harder on that day. You know, we're talking about a Grey Cup that gets won by one team playing one game, and we get a couple that have to win twice. That's not a long streak. And that's all I mean is that you just got to be hot at the right time. And I really don't see any of the teams in the playoffs not being able to be hot for 2 games. That's all I'm saying.
For me, I mean, BC, they're that team for me. They went on a roll. Now, you wonder, can they keep it up? That's always been the question. But we've seen, how many teams have we seen? They get on a roll. They find their stride. I mean, Nathan, that there's no offense right now, I think, operating at a higher level than what BC is. They'll have that advantage in at least the first playoff game at home, and I think that's a huge factor for them.
The Dome.
We'll see if that gets negated when they play Saskatchewan. I don't know how the weather's out there versus what it would be like in BC, but like BC for me can be that team. Now, defensively, I still think we'll see if they'll be able to if their defense can step up. But I think that offense is playing at such a high level that's going to be so hard to stop. And look, Winnipeg, I know that a lot of people have been down on them, but they still have that championship core, that's been there at every Grey Cup since 2019.
We're about to find out how important experience is, because that's about all they got.
There it is.
That's about all they got.
Well, not only that,
it ain't rolling into the playoffs. It ain't a consistent offense. It's none of that. They haven't even come close. Their wins have felt like losses in recent weeks. That's the mood of the Bombers going in.
And not only that, will Zach be able to start and finish the game too? Because that's, I think, something that's on the minds too. Like he's been hit hard by injuries this year, and we saw it in the Grey Cup that it just when he's not in there,
Strevler's not there anymore.
So. You know, you don't have Strevler either. Like you are relying on you're relying on a guy who, when he got put into that Grey Cup game, I mean, unfortunate position for him. Like, you don't expect that to happen, but it kind of all just was too. The moment was just too big, and the rest of the team, it kind of just all kind of fell apart for them. Like Montreal is still, I still think like they have the form to get there, but they have to, like, now the pressure, right? The pressure to get there is another one too, because when they won in 2023, they went on the identity of nobody believed that we could be there. Well, that's not, they can't use that anymore.
Exact same attitude as Winnipeg. They were a carbon copy of the 2019. Like, exactly. I felt it the entire week. And while the Bombers weren't quite, and I say this, I say arrogance isn't like confidence arrogance. The Ticats were insanely confident in 2019.
Oh yeah.
And the Bombers were kind of too, right, that year, right, against Montreal. It was like you had Willie Jefferson wearing glasses indoors. You had guys with cameras as if they were shooting documentaries. Like that, it was a more measured confidence. And I'm not being biased just because it was Winnipeg, because it was like the Simone Lawrence led Ticats. So it was like, you know, I liked the swagger that the Ticats did. It just didn't work out for them.
Yeah. Oh, I remember that 2020, because it's just like everyone's like, well, Winnipeg's been there. They've done it so many times. They're going to be hungry because they had lost the year before to Toronto, so they don't want to lose it again. And Montreal is like, okay, keep pumping their tires while we can kind of fly under the radar a little bit. Like, I'm wondering, is there a team that's flying under the radar for you guys?
Just one, and I think it's Calgary. And I was just going to bring it up because Calgary was the hottest team in the league at the start of by the midway point of the season. I had Calgary winning the Grey Cup midway through the season. They were 5-0 against Winnipeg and Saskatchewan. Mm-hmm. So, and then all of a sudden the weather turned, and so did this team. And so the big, and why I say, we're certainly underselling them. I'm not saying they're in a great position, because I'm with both of you. I think BC is rolling. I think Nathan Rourke, gets through that first game against Calgary, but it's going to have to be against a Vernon Adams who the BC Lions dumped for Nathan Rourke. Like, what is Vernon Adams thinking? Is you talk about the stage getting too big. I think there's a lot of confidence in VA, but I also think there's a lot of stress and pressure on him. And I don't know if he's always dealt with that stress and pressure, like other more, I don't want to say more like composed quarterbacks, but that's kind of what it is. Like, yeah. I think VA is incredibly talented. He's dynamic. I think in his own brain, he's had to convince himself that he belongs, and I don't want to get too psychological with like the whole imposter syndrome or whatnot, but this is a guy who for the first half of his career in the Canadian Football League didn't even study really, right? Like it took, I think it was Trevor Harris. I forget exactly who. Yeah, Trevor Harris, I believe, in Montreal, for him to realize like the work it took to study for games. Like he still talks about that kind of stuff. Yeah. This guy was a phenom in college based on pure athletic ability, and he thought that he could just wing it up here. So like I have a ton of respect for VA and the player he's become and the hurdles he's had to clear and the adversity he's faced. But we've also seen the stage get too big for him at times. And I wonder if this is one of those cases where he's, and it's not like people will say it's not VA against Nathan Rourke, but it absolutely is VA against Nathan Rourke. Like this is the Canadian Football League where offense reigns supreme. So if you're not going toe-to-toe with Nathan Rourke in that game, you are going to be analyzed for why this team lost. And I wonder, how Vernon Adams takes that. And I think that's why I see this team as maybe one of those like quiet teams that make some noise here, because everybody on the outside is thinking this team is cooked, right? This team hasn't played the way they've, the defense hasn't been as good as they've been earlier. That, VA, all of a sudden the narrative is he can't play in fall games and all that kind of negativity. But, I do think Dave Dickinson's a good coach. I think what he's been able to do this year, is certainly impressive compared to previous years. I think the locker room under VA's leadership is certainly improved. And so I do think this team could be a quiet, dangerous thing because, like I said, playoffs is a different beast. And, I have a ton of respect for Buck Pierce, but Buck Pierce has called some pretty lame games, guys, in the playoffs. And I wonder how that, what all of a sudden bag of tricks that he decides to dip into for this one and whether or not it works. I do have BC. I think they're understandable favorites in this. That's no surprise, I think, to anybody. But I do think if you look back and want to make an argument for Calgary, you just have to look at this season to realize that they're that.
But are they too banged up? That's the other thing too. Like they've lost some important players, especially on defense. Sometimes, and I know they've made some moves to address those as well. But sometimes, you could lose not only players that are good on the field, but character guys that help you off the field as well.
Two things, just two for me. I want to underline what you said there. When the weather changed, so did Vernon Adams' fortunes. Well, the weather's changing back again in BC for him to that point. And secondarily, he has had an impact on a game all on his own. He's made big plays. If that Vernon Adams shows up, unfortunately, that's the two-edged sword here. He has big games and he has bad games. It's going to depend which game he brings to BC Place.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that the story of VA's career?
Totally.
Like which one's going to show up, right? The one who's rolling out of the pocket and moving the ball downfield with relative ease and moving the chains again with relative ease, or is it going to be the one that is looks like he's trying to do too much on every single play and ends up with 3 interceptions, right? Because he's trying to do it all, and that's the thing about Vernon Adams that you have to respect is that he puts it all on his shoulders, right? He wants to be the difference. He sees this as his team. He sees it as his, when I say his team, I mean that his team to lead, his team to set the example for. And you need that in every locker room. If that isn't your quarterback, and that probably was, we heard it from the Elks, season-ending media availability that Trey Ford kind of needed to prove to his teammates that he cared as much as he actually did, right? Like he was a quiet guy, a quieter guy, right? You need that guy to be a leader, and VA is certainly that. And it will be interesting, and I think it's fair to say, can he slash these demons or defeat this demon or this dragon that is the BC Lions? That and I say dumb because that's what happened. Sports is a cruel business. I don't think he was disrespected in the sense that people didn't appreciate them. They just found a better quarterback who happened to be from that province. So that's understandable, but I still think there's going to be a lot of emotions for VA, and let's see if this is, if that emotion can be that catalyst for him to be that, it's writing the script, guys. It's setting him up to write this script let's see how he, seizes the moment, and whether or not we can be writing about, another great playoff victory, under awesome, fairy tale like circumstances.
Wins and losses in the Grey Cup revolve around all the quarterbacks. I can say a few names: Bo Levi Mitchell, not Trevor Harris, Zach Caleros, Nick Arbuckle, Kelly, and there are quarterbacks that have failed. Really for me that's what it's going to come down to. What kind of leadership the quarterbacks bring. Cody Fajardo made his legacy in Montreal when nobody believed in him. Vernon Adams can step into that. Kelly stepped into it. Arbuckle stepped into it. So I look forward to seeing if we're going to have a quarterback that establishes his reputation and changes his trajectory in the minds of football fans all around Canada.
I think that's a great point, because and this is, again, no disrespect, but like, Vernon Adams hasn't done enough in this league to really be remembered if he doesn't win a Grey Cup. I'm not saying people won't remember him or, whatever and whatnot, but like, you're kind of known for what you won. Zach Caleros is a prime example. Zach Caleros was a great player in Hamilton, right? Was a rising star, was an MOP candidate until he got injured a couple. So he had this success, much like Vernon Adams has, right? Thrown out the lights, got some wins, dynamic player, whatever. But he solidified himself with the Bombers, right? With winning championships and getting to championships. And that's the thing that's missing. And to your point about Cody, like, Cody was on his way out of the league until he, Jason Moss made him a champion in Montreal. And now think about it, guys. Like, I used to be the most critical of Cody Fajardo when he was on the Riders. I thought some of the antics, particularly at the end of his time there, were just so ridiculous, talking to the media before the season was over, like just kind of being lame and talking about the pressures of being football, which I'm not against, the mental health talks and all that. But it was like social media stuff. It was just to me, it was ridiculous. Now I think Cody Fajardo is the man. Like, he's to me, like, whether it was a conversation, the big pump up talk or whatever before the game, or just his confidence now. And here we are, guys. And there's a team in the Edmonton Elks essentially openly, publicly talking about how much they want him. And he's like, yeah, let me talk with my wife. I'm thinking about retirement. There's no way Cody Fajardo is thinking about retirement right now. There's absolutely no chance that he's thinking about hanging up the cleats when Edmonton wants him. Like, there's no way. So to me, it's just like, he wrote his ticket out of that season, right? And then was replaced, right? And was essentially written off as a number 2, like, oh yeah, he's a good backup option and whatever. And then he did something special with Edmonton. VA's been able to do these things. This is, and his time in Calgary has been another one of those chapters. He's helped turn around a team who was like 6-12 the year before and just as bad the year before that. Now he needs to finish the job. And here we are talking about Nathan Rourke and his ability to put his name and start his legacy, and the Riders getting through their years of not being able to punch their ticket into the Grey Cup, and, Hamilton figuring it out after they lost back-to-back weeks. What about Calgary, right? What about VA? And it's just, again, one of several storylines, and why this league, regardless of who wins, it feels like this year, even if the Bombers win, I know that would be incredibly boring and would drive people insane around this league. But even them finding their way to the Grey Cup, let alone winning, is a good story. So I think we're kind of getting spoiled here as far as who gets to the dance, and what storylines they bring with them.
Here, I'm going to comment on this comment I'm going to make. If Edmonton makes the playoffs at the end of the season, I think in my way of thinking, I know I'm not pointing at anything in particular, but I'm saying Edmonton could have been considered for maybe winning the Grey Cup.
I think they would get their ass kicked in whatever game they were in.
You think so?
Yeah, I don't think. I think they were playing with a bit of fool's gold. I don't.
Yeah, me too. Like, they were playing video game offense. Like, it was Justin Rankin. Like, it was just going to one guy the whole time. Like, they have the worst receiver group in the league. Like, this is the thing I find so funny about Edmonton. Ed Hervey, creates another headline earlier this week because he's going to replace, I think you blow up headlines like they can be replaced. He says about their 4 quartet of linebackers that, really stood out this year. And I don't disagree with them, but it's just like, it's just like that. I don't know, man. To me, like it's kind of like, yeah, anyone can be replaced, but I find Edmonton to be a team that like he really dropped the ball when it came to building around the offense. And I thought he's like, if you look at like Kittens Jr. is not a number one receiver in the CFL. And so I thought that Cody Fajardo did a lot with very little. I think they would have went into BC or would have went into Montreal and it would have been nice that they got into the playoffs. But this is the other thing for them to get into the playoffs. And this was my point and why I feel the strongest about them getting not only losing, but being dominated. They've been playing playoff football for 2 months. Yeah. So to show up and have to like, maybe there's like that experience, but the emotional toll that they've had to put into every single game because it's been do or die for as long as it had they actually been able to punch their ticket to the playoff, yeah, I think in some people's minds they would have been, scary, and who knows, anything can happen by just punching your ticket. But I think they would have got dominated.
Well, I disagree, but that's okay. We will never find. We'll never know.
Never know.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
No, I was just about to say I got to run to an appointment because I'm just looking at the time. But I'll just say this: I think it'll be a BC Saskatchewan West, and I think it'll be. I still think it's gonna be a Montreal Hamilton. I think in the end, wouldn't surprise me if we have a BC Montreal Grey Cup.
Yeah,
Saskatchewan. As much as I like their team, they just haven't, as a group, been able to prove that they can put it all together. Now, BC hasn't either, but I think BC has been on a really good run, and Saskatchewan's kind of been on a bit of a up and down. So they gotta kind of turn things around, and they'll get the benefit of the bye for sure. But I think BC, they'll like the momentum that they're on.
BC will have to win in Winnipeg, and that will be my transition. David, thanks for being here. We'll talk down the road.
Thanks, Jeff.
Jeff, I just want to conclude this with talking about Winnipeg and the Grey Cup in Winnipeg. Tell me how important that is to Winnipeg.
Yeah, I'm not going to it's obviously incredibly important, right? And it's given what the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have done over the last, having made the last 5 Grey Cups, obviously winning twice, they've created a major buzz in the city, right? Like it's coming to a time, like even if they wouldn't have made the Grey Cup last year, right? It would have been kind of like a bit of a lull, right? Like it would have, I'm not saying would have sucked out all the excitement or whatever, but, and even this year as they limp into the playoffs, but anyways, my point is that they've created this confidence, right? Like, Winnipeg fans went from the losers and the laughing stock of the league, having the longest Grey Cup drought, to being at the top of the mountain for years. Even in the years they lost, they could still to 8 other or to 7 other teams out there go, well, we got further than you, right? Like, and again, the excitement, the game day atmosphere. Winnipeg sold out the entire season this year, right? The first team to do that, and I think their existence, maybe in CFL history. So they've created a buzz. So the city takes a sense of pride, right? Like, and I'm not here to like, this is more to pump up Winnipeg in the market than like,
well, that's okay. No, that's
on like a Toronto, but like that's kind of the difference. That's the difference in Vancouver, even though there's a lot of great things that are happening in with Amar Doman and the Lions, right? A lot of great things there. But like, whether it's Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, really anywhere outside of probably Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Regina, it's going to be visible, right? Like the whole, like, it's not going to be like you need to go to this area of the city to to really feel that Grey Cup atmosphere. Obviously, the downtown area and in around the stadium are going to be the 2 hotbeds where events are happening. It's like they're going to have events all over the city, but you're going to feel the buzz. It's like the city is big enough, but also small enough to really feel that, like, that I'm at the Grey Cup. And I think for a lot of people who are visiting Winnipeg, they're going to really feel that excitement, the work that was put into it, which is a nice transition to my next point, the work that's been put into this. Like, look, like, since they've changed the format with the Grey Cup. As you know, Frank, they used to do it like, when MLSE bought the Argos, right? It was like, okay, you get the Grey Cup this year to recuperate some money, right? It was any team that, like, it was almost like, well, you haven't hosted it for a while. Here, we'll help your bottom line. We'll help your bottom line. Well, a few years ago, they changed it into a bidding process. So now you actually have to bid for the game, and it's not like, hey, you owe me this. This is part of my argument. You have to put on paper what your investment would be, what you would do, how you envision it. And it's been like that for a couple of years now. And each of those years, whether it was in Hamilton, it was in Hamilton a few years back, and then Regina, and then Hamilton again, and then Winnipeg, and then last year in Vancouver. Winnipeg has been following along in the last couple Grey Cups, taking notes. And if anyone knows Wade Miller, like Wade Miller is incredibly competitive. He's incredibly dedicated to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and it will be his personal mission to ensure that this is the best Grey Cup in history. Like, it's just, I know that sounds like a major homer sales pitch.
No,
Like,
that's cool.
This is exactly like I've been to the last 10 Grey Cups. I'm telling you right now, this Grey Cup is going to be better from a event, atmosphere, maybe not weather. I'm not going to argue that weather is going to be better in Winnipeg.
Well, it's going to be a factor.
Absolutely. It's not going to be minus 25 or 30, knock on wood, but it's not going to be Vancouver. You know what I mean? Like, It's like Vancouver, like, obviously, right? So it's going to be colder. But if you're someone who's been there for years and love it every year and get fun out of it every year, this is going to be one of those years that you're going to have an absolute blast. The parties are going to be great. The venues are going to be great. There's going to be a buzz. And, I've said this to a lot of people. And then, as someone who's covered this league for, more than a decade, it's not really about the game, right? Like, It's like all this work. Obviously, the game is the wrap up to an otherwise, week long or days long party. This is the, this is going to be a lot of fun leading up to it. So, that's, again, it sounds like a pitch. It's what I've seen.
Oh, no.
It's going to be, and it's going to be, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be awesome.
I'm going to make a bigger pitch. There's a green elephant in the room when it comes to the Grey Cup in Winnipeg.
So if you're talking about the locker room situation?
No. I'm talking about what if it's Saskatchewan and Winnipeg? Mm-hmm. You want to talk about focus? You want to talk about interest at the location in Winnipeg? I'm like, for me, the excitement that I look forward to, not the only reason, I think Saskatchewan's capable of making the Grey Cup. I agree with you that Winnipeg has a path to the Grey Cup. Totally agree with you. But for me, the real thing is, I'm dying to go to a Grey Cup in Winnipeg that has Saskatchewan as the visiting team.
Oh, that's what I was getting at with the locker room, because the locker room, there's a lot of talk because I knew where you were going, I just didn't know exactly where you were headed, because the locker rooms, because there's a lot of buzz, right, about the home team in the West gets the home facilities, right, the locker facilities. So if Winnipeg were to make it through the East, there was a lot of talk, including from myself, that was what happens in that situation. Like, do the Riders get the Bombers locker room and the Bombers have to do use the visitors facilities? Like, how is that going to work? And from what I'm told, that's not the case. Winnipeg would, there's language in the contracts or whatever in the in the writing.
The home team is the home team.
That if for some way, some reason, a team was to go over that in the event they met in the Grey Cup, that team would actually get to keep their facility, which I think would probably benefit Saskatchewan more, because I could only imagine what Winnipeg would do or maybe not what they would do, the potential they would have to spy or to do whatever on it. Obviously, I'm suggesting things that are illegal that again, wouldn't do, but this league it wouldn't be the first time in this league, that's for sure.
Well, that's the beauty of football. I think there's no need to go any further, because I think that would be the climax to a season for two fan bases and for people going to the Grey Cup that go to wear their uniforms of their favorite teams, which the CFL brings. People go to the game not just because of the teams that are playing, but for the event. To your point, that is a glorious moment in the Canadian Football League. It is one of the things that has carried the Canadian Football League these years, and it's also kept TSN in the game. The Grey Cup is a wonderful experience on television and at the game. It's the biggest event, in my opinion, in Canada when it comes to sports. I know the World Series is happening. I know of the Stanley Cup. I know all that stuff. But for me, there's nothing more consistently drawing to TV audience and fans in Canada than the Grey Cup. So congratulations on having that and being at home for that experience, Jeff.
Hey, thanks so much. I have so many people to thank. I want to thank Wade Miller for getting the bid. Just kidding. But, you know what? I'm looking forward to it, obviously. I mentioned having been to the last 10 Grey Cups. A lot of fun times, a lot of, it's always such a great event. It's such a great opportunity to really get a piece of Canadiana. I think, with what we're dealing with as a country now and a lot of the division that's out there, it's really cool to see a lot of people unifying. And I think I don't want to make it about US-Canada relations or anything like that, or make it too political, but I do think there's a certain national pride that exists today that maybe wasn't as strong, in years past, and that should play a role in helping things. But, that's obviously not the end all be all. Winnipeg is a very, very welcoming city, a lot of fun people, a lot of engagement. And that's the part too, which I think is going to be awesome. There's obviously a lot of volunteers, but even just the people in the city are going to understand there's lots of visitors coming in from out of town and, are going to be treated well and whatnot. Right. You're always going to have those loser fans that exist. That's unfortunately part of every fan base, but the vast majority of Winnipeggers are kind and courteous and polite, and will certainly want to, be a reflection of the week. And I have no doubt in my mind that they'll be viewed in a positive light for sure.
I'll be going to that event. I'll be missing Caroline. She's a volunteer who's gone across the country volunteering at Grey Cups. And there are lots of volunteers that cross the country to volunteer, and there'll be the same will happen in Winnipeg, where Winnipeg will welcome volunteers from across the country who want to be a part of the Grey Cup Festival. And that's something I look forward to in each city when we go to the Grey Cup, the love of the game and the love of the event that you get to share. And so it's an experience for anyone that goes to the Grey Cup. Not that the game isn't important, because of course it's the peak. It happens on Sunday, but the work up to that game. And I have all the faith in the world, not because I'm talking to a man from Winnipeg, but I have all the faith in the world that Winnipeg's going to put on the kind of show that will be as good as anywhere else. And that's what I look forward to. So congratulations on getting the Grey Cup. And Jeff, thanks for your leadership in the Football Writers of Canada. He's also the president of Football Writers in Canada. And I got to tell you, reporting on the Canadian Football League, I've been referred to as a friend of the Canadian Football League. I don't think there's a bigger friend of the Canadian Football League than you, Jeff. Jeff Hamilton.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, for sure. I definitely, I care about covering this league, and I think there's like any good working relationship, it's the give and take. You like to promote the good things they do, and certainly hold them accountable for the times they mess up. So yeah, I've really enjoyed my time covering the league, and it will be a lot. Not only will it be a fun for everybody, when Winnipeg hosts here, but it's I know I'm gonna have a great time showing even the reporters the city, right? Giving them a reflection of a city that hasn't hosted it in 10 years. So I know Wade's excited. I know the city's excited. I know the province is excited. So hopefully that shows up and shows off, and everybody leaves that city, or even those who see it on TV, get a good idea of what this city offers.
Well, I hope our network in the U.S. teases some Americans to come up to check out the Grey Cup. It's a great.
Hopefully no snow.
Listen, whatever it is, football is a game that's played under the elements. I'm not saying it's preferred, but it's made to play in any way possible that the weather can give us. And the nice thing is, it does have an impact on the game, and it keeps all the teams on their toes.
Absolutely.
That's why the Irish put staples under their shoes to win a Grey Cup. So it's all good. Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate this, and taking an hour and 20 minutes, buddy. You just broke the record for length of show. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Man. Okay, everybody, you can follow what we do here at Candid Frank Stanishi 1030 on YouTube. And of course, we're on Streampunk, the Streampunk Network. We hope you check us out. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
The